All right. Hello and welcome to the AutoMox Hands-on IT podcast. This is episode 4, and as always, I'm your host, Landon Miles. So this month at AutoMox, we've been talking a lot about the happiness of the end user. In the last few episodes, we've been talking about technology and methods to enable technology. Now, this podcast episode is going to be in a similar vein, but slightly different. So IT is the intersection of technology and people. And most of us are in IT because technology is the easy part. Now, for many of us, the hard part of that equation is the people side of things. In this podcast, I'm going to talk about 3 things that I see often missed in IT. These are some of the lessons that I personally learned the hard way, have seen in my years of IT, or saw other people learn the hard way. So I'm going to share them with you so maybe you don't have to learn the hard way. If you only listen this far, here are the 3 items. So number 1, change is the only constant in IT. Because of that, communication is critical to being efficient in IT. Also, asking for help is critical in that area too. Now, I'm going to mix up the order slightly, and we're going to start with communication. So communication is key. Now, in IT, we can simplify communication down to 2 types of communication. There's a IT to IT communication and IT to non-IT. So in a little bit, we'll talk about IT to IT communications, but for now, let's focus on communications between IT and non-IT. So with that, always assume positive intent from others and push positive intent when problem solving. Enable your end users, learn about people, what they do, what they need, and how you can solve their problems. And then find influencers. So we're going to start with assuming positive intent. This is critically important to our IT. Maybe someone accidentally deleted something or broke something. Most likely it was because they were trying to do their job. It was probably an accident. They're embarrassed that it happened and they're not actively out to get you. Now, with cybersecurity, it doesn't really work to assume positive intent from everyone, but when working with coworkers' problems, probably best to assume positive intent. Now, when you're solving a problem or a system is down, a little bit of communication goes a long way to pushing positive intent within the problem-solving process. So here's what you can do. Let them know what you're doing, let them know why you're doing it, and then let them know when you're doing it and how long it might take. There's a term in psychology called code switching, and that means switching the way you speak depending on who you're speaking to. You wouldn't explain the most deeply technical concepts to a 6-year-old, and honestly, we don't want to hear the nuanced details of accounting in the accounting department explained to us. So know your audience, saying, hey, there's a setting that gets flipped in the software sometimes. We're still working to figure out why, but this should fix it for the time being. Sounds a lot better to non-IT people than, well, there's a bug in the software that flips a registry key to an undesirable state, and then the software stops functioning correctly. We're not sure why at this time. Our intermediary fix is to set the registry value, and maybe 1 to 2 cycles will have this fixed. Know how you're communicating to people, know how deep to go, and set that level. Like a little bit of communication goes a long way. So next is to enable your end users. Work to be the go-to person if someone has a problem or an idea. I'm going to play a clip from the CISO IT podcast from this month, and there's a really interesting part where they talk about not saying no if an employee or a coworker asks you to do something.
I would say the answer is probably never no, right? And I think too many security people, like their default answer is no, you can't do it. And I'll share a story with you. And I don't think I've shared this one with you yet or not, but earlier in my security career, we had a new CIO, and his answer was, you can't say no to anybody. If the answer is no, you need to come to me and explain why the answer is no, and I will go to them and tell them why the answer is no, which is a pretty hard line in the sand, right?
Yep.
Not too surprising, a couple of days later, a friend of mine who was in engineering came up to me and said, Rich, I have an idea. You're going to think this is a stupid idea, but hear me out. He's like, we're getting ready to deploy, or we're trying to build our network management platform on this thing called an iPad, right? Clearly back a couple of years ago when iPads were new. He says it doesn't have an Ethernet port. It's only got wireless. And so I want to put an access point in the lab that I can connect to that just doesn't do any security stuff, just lets me connect right in, because I guess at the time you couldn't put security on the iPads or something. And in my head, I'm screaming, yeah, that's the stupidest thing ever. Like, there's no way I'm doing that. But I let him finish. And instead of saying no, he walked me through what they were doing and why they were doing it. And I said, how about if we do it a different way? So instead of him honestly going off and just buying the access point and doing it anyway, because we were a networking company, right? And hating IT for making him do it, he became a huge evangelist, right? And his comment to people was, go talk to the security team. Like, they're not going to say no. They'll help you find a good way to do it. And so if you start with no, you end up being the obstacle to be avoided. If you start listening, you become that trusted partner, and they'll come to you, even when what they're doing may be a little outside the norm, which is really what you want.
So be the go-to person. Find out the intent behind what they're saying. My mom frequently uses the phrase, "It's what I mean, not what I say." So whether they accidentally call you the wrong name or ask for something that's technically impossible, try to understand the problem that they need to solve instead of what they're actually saying. Now, proactively go to each department, ask them questions about their workflow, try to find any trouble spots and see what roadblocks you can help move. You can proactively solve problems for these people instead of reactively solving problems. And a bonus is if they come to you, they don't try to solve the problems themselves, and it saves you a lot of time in the long run. So, next step is find influencers. Sometimes rolling out changes can be tough. Find one or two people within your organization who get excited about things working better. Now, back in the day when I was in IT, we migrated from 2.5-inch hard drives to solid state drives in our laptop fleet. Now, this was maybe 10 years ago or so, and SSDs had just become at a price point that made this doable. Now, I distinctly remember the first one that we did. The employee was not very excited about us needing their laptop for a little while. And not being able to do their work. We let them know the timeline and some of the advantages to having this done, but to them, it was just IT getting in the way of their workflow. Now, we got it done as quickly as possible and got them their laptop back. They got back to work. They were fine. Now, the next morning, this person came barging into my office, and I was slightly concerned. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. Normally, people don't come in with that much gusto in the morning. So, however, it was to tell me that they were so happy with their computer and whatever we'd done to it was amazing. They couldn't have been happier. Now, intrigued by this change in attitude, I pressed in a little bit for some more info. The difference was that her laptop booted up before they got back from making their coffee. They quickly began telling the others in the office, and soon we had a line of people asking to be next in this upgrade instead of dreading the downtime or dreading the interruption to their workflow. So finding an influencer can really change the mentality of your organization. It's like, hey, this is amazing. Go ask them to do this for your laptop versus, I don't want you to take my laptop. I need to do my work. I have stuff I need to get done today. There's a fundamental difference in when you have these people on board. All right, now the second point. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be afraid to say, I'm not sure. Let me look into that. Guess what? You don't have to know the answer to every question. You don't have to solve every problem by yourself. You can bring others into your problem-solving process, whether external or internal. Contact your software supplier or hardware supplier sales engineers or FAEs. They see a little bit of everything, and not everything has to be a novel solution. So with this, reach out to people, ask questions, go to trade shows, figure out how people are solving these problems with their tools, and see if you can use those tools in your workflow. Now, another point on this one is IT to IT communication. So problem solving is creativity. Now, whether they'll say it or not, people crave feedback on their creative endeavors. Be specific with that feedback. I really like how you solved that specific problem. I would never have thought to do it that way, but it's so efficient. Also, be the first to ask for help. Now, we love it when people come to us for help. And for many of us, that's one of the reasons we're in IT. In your team, start to foster an atmosphere of asking for help. Say, hey, when you have a minute, can you help me look at this problem? I'm really struggling to solve this one. Could use your help. Maybe we can push our brains together and see what we can come up with. Destigmatize asking for help. It's a big improvement to your workflow. It takes a huge load off, and you know what? Everybody needs help sometimes. It's not a weakness. Now, the last one is change is the only constant in IT. Don't be afraid to let things go and move on. you need to learn to let these things go and embrace change. For personal growth, IT growth, you have to let go of old projects, positions, or responsibilities. As IT professionals, we love standing up projects. We put a lot of time, thought, and energy into every small detail. If it needs to change, we can find a way to make it work. We can use this hardware here or there, or repurpose this. Yeah, we have this. Let's use this as the solution. However, sometimes the right solution is to let it go. When I started my career, it was at a small company that grew very quickly. Being at a small company, my IT career started with, "Hey, Landon, can you take a look at my computer?" And it took off like a rocket ship from there. Now, believe it or not, I started my career in the pre cloud for everything era. Now, it was at the very end of that era, but my one of my first projects involved standing up server infrastructure and a network for this company, and it turned out great. I spent a lot of time thinking about every detail, getting it working perfectly, and it was a great solution. Now, the company continued to grow and it spread throughout the globe. In IT, many times our first instinct is to try to figure out how to make what we have work. It's hard to decommission a project we work so hard and so closely with to stand up and maintain. However, this server solution quickly became not the right solution for a global company. While it was the right solution at the time, now moving to the cloud was the best solution. Now, without embracing this change, the company would not have had the correct solution to the problem. IT is equal parts pushing new technology and maintaining old technology. Sometimes the budget for the correct change is there, and sometimes it's not. Now, however, in my experience, when technology gets painful, the budget tends to quickly appear and become available. So, from delegating tasks to accepting new roles, pushing new solutions, or even changing jobs, letting go is really tough. But without letting go, we can't move forward. And now I'm afraid it's time to let go of recording this podcast for you. With that, my final piece of advice is to set aside some time for people learning. We all love learning and reading about technology, the newest hardware, software, and technologies coming out. At least for me, I can spend a lot of time watching videos or reading articles on these topics. So my charge to you is to spend some time, maybe one day a week or so, to hone your communication skills. Listen to people podcasts, books, or other interesting insights. Everybody has a story. Now, one of my favorite resources is Brene Brown. She has podcasts, books. All of them are really good. I'll put some of my favorites in the show notes and maybe a couple other book recommendations also. But that's really my charge to you for this month is spend some time learning about people, learning about how to improve your communication skills. And with that in mind, we'll see you next month. Until then, good luck making your end users happy. It'll make your IT life much easier.